Good morning, class. With you here in this literature class this morning is Mrs. Uremba G.I. Our topic this morning is BIRCHES. BIRCHES is the last non-African poetry that we have to treat. BIRCHES is written by Robert Lee Frost. It is a very long poem. And so because of time, we are not going to go through it right here. But it is a must that you have to read it up in your exam focus and get a mastery of it line by line. So we are going straight to the background of the poem. The birches are a particular type of trees. There are a particular type of trees, and they are medium-sized and are found in temperate part of the world. This poem is a reflection of the poet's childhood memories of swinging on a particular birch, that is a tree. Now we look at the setting. The setting of this poem is in northern New England. About the poet. Robert Lee Frost was born in 1874 in San Francisco, California. He was an American and one of the greatest poets of the 20th century. He was a renowned poet who received a Congressional Gold Medal in 1960 for his poetry, and he died in 1963. Now we are going to look at the subject matter of this poem. In this poem, the narrator looks at the birches in the forest and imagines that their bent nature is as a result of a boy swinging on them. However, he knows that the bending of these branches has been caused by eyes as a result of the weight of the eyes on the branches. For the poet, climbing the birch is a means of freedom, and thus the act of swinging on birches is presented as a way to escape the hard realities of life in its entirety. When the boy climbs the tree, the assumption is that he is ascending towards a celestial plane of experience, a place where he and the elements of his imagination can be free. The idea that runs through the poem is that the harsh realities of life make it imperative that a place of refuge, even if it is for a brief period of time, be created or located. The main message of the poem is that it is when one is weary of life that he desires to escape its harsh realities. This is as a result of the challenges and burden responsibilities of adulthood. However, in life, one cannot escape from the harsh realities. So likewise, life's responsibilities can be sometimes unavoidable. Thus, the poet knows he will still have to face life, but at least desires some little respite from the challenges of adulthood. He then consoles himself with the fact that the earth is a place of love, so it is worth living. So having known this about the summary, having known this about the poem, that's the summary or the subject matter, we are going on now to look at the line by line analysis of the poem. In line 1 to 5, which is the first stanza, the poet persona is aware that the bent branches of the birch tree is as a result of ice storms. However, in order to create the memories of his childhood, he prefers to think some boys have been swinging them. That will be found in line 3. By doing this, he is transported to the good old days of his childhood through his imaginations. Thus, the poetic persona connects with the desire to every man to escape from the grim details of life into a world of bliss and happiness, even if it is for just a while. The second stanza, which is line 6 to 13. In this very stanza, the poet persona has returned back to his childhood in his imaginations. He begins to appreciate nature and the season. He also describes how the tree shakes off its shells after it has been affected by the breeze. This is suggestive of the fact that after man has experienced life, its beauty, trials, perils, and storms, he must be shed of his body. That is to say, he must die and be swept away, to later be translated into another realm of experience in heaven. That is what these lines are all about. And then we go straight to the third stanza, which is lines 14 to 20. In this stanza, the poetic persona continues to describe what happens to the branches and leaves of the birch trees. At a metaphorical level of interpretation, the vivid description of the shape of the branches of the birch tree, bent, withered, but not broken, is a symbolic reference to the life of every resilient human being, buffeted on the journey through the road of life by diverse vicissitudes, but whose spirit is not broken. This goes to say that man is faced with a lot of problems, but the truth is that man has to be very strong before these problems. Though he may be broken, but he is not shattered. His spirit is not broken, though he is faced with a lot of problems in life, a lot of problems that are able to break him down, but his spirit will never be broken. In line 21 to 39, which is the first stanza, the poetic persona is struck by truth. The truth is dawned on him in these lines. That should be found in line 21. As reality dawned on him that he is only exercising his power of imagination as an avenue to escape the harsh realities of the world within which he exists. In these lines, the poetic persona wishes that the young boy that he has created in the world of his imagination will be able to subdue his father's tree by riding them down over and over again until he took the stiffness out of them, and not one but hung limp. Not one was left for him to conquer. This implies that as one grows into adulthood, the euphoria of childhood disappears and one is faced with different challenges and responsibilities of adulthood, which force each individual to accept realities. In the last stanza, which is lines 40 to 59, The poetic persona begins to have some nostalgic feelings of his past as he tells the reader that, and I quote, "I was once myself a swinger of BIRCHES," line 41. He feels like becoming a child again. The poet wants an escape from this world, and even if he were to come back, he wishes to start over again as a child. It implies in this poem that life is full of sorrow and sadness, which draw man back from realizing the full potentials of happiness. Therefore, the poet persona seems to be of the view that life will be better on the birch tree, which will serve as a means of linking the earth with heaven. So this is the end of the line-by-line analysis of the poem. And so we are going straight to look at the different things that are bound in this poem. The first theme here is the theme of certainty of the transition from childhood to adulthood. Here, the poet first uses the image of the birch tree to illustrate the almost problem-free state of childhood. He expresses the fact that the transition into adulthood is certain. He therefore desires the state of his childhood again. He dreams of his childhood and wants to go back there, and he actually goes back through his imagination. So this is a pure work of imagination. He wishes to go back to his childhood, and he was able to achieve this through imagination. The second theme here is the celebration of the imaginative spirit. It can be said to be the celebration of imagination or the power of imagination. Here, the poet celebrates the ability of one's imagination to assist in a transition from the problem of life into a sublime realm of peace and happiness. The imagination makes the unreal become real, and it functions as a route of escape from the harsh and stifling realities of life. Imagination can be creative or destructive, but within the context of this poem, it is celebrated as a positive and veritable agent that is integral to the development of mankind. For instance, the speaker of this poem never sees a boy or comes across anyone. He merely imagines the situation about a boy swinging on the birches, basking in his freedom, whereas he knows that the truth about the birches is that they are twisted by ice storms. His imaginative energy propels him, and therefore, through the power of his imagination, he says, and I quote, "I should prefer to have some boy bend them." That will be seen in line 13, line 23. That is the power of imagination. Imagination is freedom. The next thing we are going to look at is the utopian world of a child as compared with the dystopian world of an adult. The idea foregrounded in this poem is that the world of a child is perfect. The child exists in a world of innocence, while that of the adult is a world of experience and awareness. The world of a child is a world of happiness, while that of the adult is full of unhappiness and misery. The child has nothing to worry about, and this is why the boy in the poem could go on and on with swinging on the tree without caring about any other thing. But to the adult, life is like a pathless wood. There are a lot of responsibilities, challenges which pose a threat to his existence. So, in this theme, we are talking of utopian world. What is utopian? By this we mean a world where everything and everyone works in perfect harmony, while the dystopian world is a corrupted, miserable, and dysfunctional state or society. The child operates in a world where everything and everyone works in perfect harmony, whereas the adult dwells and operates in a corrupted, miserable, and dysfunctional society or state. So that is all about this third topic of the utopian world of a child as compared with the dystopian world of an adult. The last thing we are to look at is life is harsh, or the harshness of life. In talking about the phase of adulthood or experience, an important point that the poet tries to make is that the world of the adult is very complicated and harsh. This poem was published in 1916 during the intense battle that characterized the First World War, which lasted for 4 years between 1914 and 1918, with the loss of millions of lives. So the harsh experiences of war and great loss of life informs the writing of this poem. So with this, we have come to the end of the themes of this poem. We are going straight to look at the language and structure of the poem. The language and structure of the poem. The language of this poem is very, very simple in style. As for the structure, it is a very long poem of 59 lines. The first 20 lines vividly describe the birch and the idea which comes to the fore.
Just do your thing, I'll edit it out.
I'm done with that.
Next one now. The next one is
Wait. Go back to the other one. Vivid description of the birch, its flexible nature, and how they can be bent temporarily.
You're not smooth today like you had the last time.
You can see how I'm doing it now, patch by patch. But I think I'm consistent.
Continue. Are we going to the next one?
Wait, I don't know whether I'll take this one again.
No, don't. Are you taking? Do you want to take it again?
No, let me take it again because I didn't read it well.
So just start from language. Just start from the next place we're going to is language and structure.
Okay. Can it be bolder?
No.
Okay.
This is just it.
Okay, let's start from here.
The next. You think it's still recording all this while? You see, now I will edit it out. Just continue. Just start talking like as if it's.
All right. The next thing we are going to look at is language and structure of the poem. The language is very simple and conversational. It is a poem of 59 lines. The first 20 lines is a vivid description of the birch, its flexible nature, and how they can be bent temporarily by a boy swinging on them. The next thing we look at is the poetic devices used in the poem. The following poetic devices were used by the poet. One is the assonance. The assonance, which is the repetition of vowel sounds on a line of poetry. The A sound is assonating in when, bent, and left. Similarly,
I thought you practice all this. Didn't you do all this ones in the beginning?
I jumped something. Is this recording?
Everything is still recording now. It's just that I have plenty work now to edit.
The first poetic device
The line
used
start
here.
from poetic techniques.
Okay. The next thing we are going to look at now is the poetic devices used in the poem. The following poetic devices were used in the poem. The first one is assonance, which is the repetition of vowel sound in a line of poetry. The A sound is assonating in ways like when, bend, and left. The vowel sound I assonates in the personal pronoun I and right in line 1. The next poetic device is used is alliteration. The use of alliteration.
Stop. It's not the next poetic device, it's the next poetic device, singular.
Noise is coming from here. Let me wind up.
Party scatter. This one, tractor is bringing noise from there. Now I'm closing this one small. The place will be too hot.
I better close it, let it be too hot. Let us you just hear from here now.
You start this thing.
Poetic device again.
And you see, when you say the next, it's not the next poetic devices, it's the next poetic device, singular.
Okay. The next thing we're going to do is to look at the poetic devices as seen in the poem. The following poetic devices were used by the poet. 1. The first one is assonance.
Stop. 1. The first one.
The first one is
No,
assonance.
you said 1. The first one is assonance.
Okay.
Number 1 or the first one directly.
Okay.
Start again, I beg. Yeah, let's go again.
The next thing we are going to look at now is the poetic devices as used by the poet. 1. Assonance. Assonance, which is the repetition of vowel sound in a line of poetry, can be found in words like when, bend, and left. I also assonate in I and right in line 1. The next poetic device is the alliteration. The use of alliteration is apparent in the poem. Car alliterates in cracks and crazes. That will be seen in line 9. Similarly, both sound alliterates in break and bowed in line 15. And the following lines where he makes
You have entered simile or more.
Oh
God. We didn't do this last part.
The next thing we are going to look at now is the poetic devices used in the poem. The first poetic device used in this poem is the assonance, which is the repetition of vowel sound in a line of poetry. The A sound is assonating in words like when, bend, and left. The vowel sound I also assonates in the personal pronoun I and right in line 1. How is this noisy? The next poetic device The next thing we are going to look at now is the poetic devices used in the poem. The first one is assonance, which is the repetition of vowel sounds in a line of poetry. The A sound is assonating in when, bend, and left. That will be seen in line 1. And the vowel sound I also assonates in the personal pronoun I and right in line 1. The next one is alliteration, which is the repetition of consonant sound in a line of poetry. The use of alliteration is apparent in the poem. K alliterates in words like cracks and crazes. Similarly, the sound B alliterates in break and bowed. The next poetic device is the simile. Frost's use of simile is unique, as seen in the following lines, where he makes a comparison between the birch tree and girls. You may see the trunk aching in the woods years afterwards, trailing their leaves on the ground like girls on hands and knees, and throw their hair before them over their heads to dry in the sun. This will be found in lines 17 to 20. Another use of simile is found in line 44, where the poet compares life to a pathless wood. Another poetic device is the hyperbole. This can be found in lines 9 to 13, where the heap of broken enamels from the birch trees is compared to the inner dome of heaven. Another poetic device used here is personification. Truth is given human qualities and personified in line 21. Contrast is another poetic device employed by the poet. This is another poetic technique that helps to bring the message to the fore. This technique is exemplified by the contrasting reality with the imagery, comparing a boy swinging on the birch tree with the activity of ice storms as reflected in lines 1 to 7. The next poetic device is symbolism. Symbolism. This poet also employs the use of symbolism. The words of the poem mostly symbolizing things within or outside the poem, mainly the birch tree. The shading of its shells, leaves, and branches symbolize man from the state of childhood till he becomes an adult. Allegory is another poetic device employed by the poet. The description of the birch tree itself represents the span of man from birth to death. In the poem, we are made to know that after the rain, the leaves spring out of the birch, but after the breeze, they wither and fall, and it is the trail that is the memory that eventually remains after the falling away. That is death.
Stop.
The
You
last
made a mistake. You jumped one full line. Wither and fall. It is the trail that remains. This is exactly the nature of man. But you jump from here. It is the trail, is the memory. So you do the allegory again.
Okay.
The next poetic device we're going to look at is allegory.
The next poetic device used here is the allegory. The poem on a surface or literal level of interpretation is very simple, but it is about a boy swinging on trees. But there is a metaphorical or secondary or figurative meaning of the poem as a whole. The description of the birch tree itself represents the span of man from birth to death. In the poem, we are made to know that that after death,
Do the allegory again now. The next poetic device.
the next poetic device as employed by the poet is the allegory. The poem on a surface or literal level of interpretation is very simple, and it is about a boy swinging on trees, but there is a metaphorical or secondary or figurative meaning of the poem as a whole. The description of the birch tree itself represents the span of man from birth to death. In the poem, we are made to know that after the rain, the leaves spring out of the birch, but after the breeze, they wither and fall, and it is the trail that remains. This is exactly the nature of man. Each man is born, grows into an adult, dies, and it is the memory that eventually remains after the falling away. That is death. The next one is the free verse. Free verse is another poetic device used by the poet. There is no distinguishing end rhyme scheme for BIRCHES. The use of free verse allows the poet to create the poem in whatever style that he desires. So the poet made use of free verse that allows him to create the poem in whatever style and way he desires to do that. This brings us to the end of this lesson. The questions are there for you to go through and answer them. As I said earlier on, go back to your exam focus and read up the BIRCHES. Read up this topic, the poem. Go through it, have a mastery, a one by one and line by line mastery of this poem. That will help you to answer your questions when the time comes. Thank you and God bless you.